I had spent my entire life in devotion. From the time I was a young boy, my world revolved around sacred teachings, rituals, and the pursuit of enlightenment. The Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita were not just scriptures to me. They were the foundation upon which I had built my existence. My days were filled with meditation, fasting, prayer, and the study of divine truths. I had been trained by the most respected gurus, men who had walked the spiritual path before me, who had dedicated their lives to uncovering the mysteries of existence. I followed them with unwavering faith, absorbing their wisdom, perfecting my discipline, and mastering the ancient prayers. Every breath I took was meant to bring me closer to moksha, the final liberation, the release from the endless cycle of birth and rebirth. I had renounced the world, shunned material comforts, and lived in austere simplicity, convinced that through sacrifice and suffering, I would achieve true enlightenment. And yet, something within me began to shift. At first, it was just a whisper, a fleeting thought that I dismissed as fatigue, a trick of the restless mind. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. It was an unease, a quiet, persistent feeling that something was missing. It made no sense. I had given my entire life to devotion. Why then did I feel this emptiness inside me? I tried to silence it with longer hours of meditation, deeper fasting, stricter discipline. I told myself that this was a test, that doubt was a deception of the material world, Maya, meant to lead me astray. But the feeling would not go away. And then, the dreams began. At first they were vague, faint images of light, a presence just beyond my reach, a voice calling my name. The first time I woke from one, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I had spent years meditating, seeking inner visions, but these dreams felt different. They were not of my own making. Each night the images grew clearer, the voice more distinct. But I could never see who was speaking. The presence in my dreams was unfamiliar, yet at the same time, I felt as if I had always known it. Sometimes I would hear my name whispered gently, carried on the wind. Other times I heard words I did not understand, spoken with an authority that shook me to my core. The dreams consumed my thoughts. I sought answers from my teachers, but their wisdom offered no comfort. Ignore them, they told me. They are distractions. Visions come only through discipline. Do not let illusions mislead you. But something inside me refused to accept that answer. These dreams were not illusions. They were real. I could feel them, not just in my mind, but in my soul. One night I woke up gasping for air, my body frozen in place. The dream had been more vivid than ever before. The light had been so bright, the voice so powerful. And in that moment I knew I could no longer ignore this. I had spent my life guiding others, offering wisdom, leading prayers. I had devoted every moment of my existence to faith. But what if I had missed something? What if the truth was not where I had always believed it to be? I did not know it yet, but my life was about to change forever. And before I continue, let me take a moment to speak directly to you. Yes, you who are watching this right now. If you've come this far, then something inside you is searching just as I once searched. This journey we are on together is not just a story, it is a revelation. I invite you to be part of this community, to walk with us as we uncover the truth that has been hidden from so many. If this message speaks to you, if you feel that longing deep within, I ask you to take a simple step, like this video, and subscribe to this channel. Not because of me, but because I believe that what you are about to hear could change everything. And now let me continue my story. I had always believed that the body was merely a vessel, a temporary form that housed the soul. It was discipline that mattered, devotion that purified. And so I sought to push myself beyond all limits, to silence every doubt through sheer will. If my heart was restless, I would still it. If my mind wavered, I would break it into submission. If my body grew weak, I would deny its hunger until it surrendered. That was why I made the decision. I would fast like never before. I had performed countless fasts in my life, some lasting days, others stretching into weeks. But this time I would go further than ever. No food, no water, no comforts, nothing but prayer and meditation. If my soul was being tested, I would prove my devotion. I would reach enlightenment, no matter the cost. The first day was easy. The second, bearable. By the third, my limbs felt heavy, my breath shallow, but I persisted. I ignored the dizziness, the trembling in my hands, the way my vision blurred when I stood too quickly. I had silenced the voice inside me, and then, on the final night, it happened. I knelt before the temple altar, my body weak but my mind resolute. The scent of burning oil lamps filled the air. The rhythmic chants of my fellow devotees echoed through the chamber, a song I had heard thousands of times before. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. And then, pain. It was sudden, violent, unlike anything I had ever felt before. A sharp, searing explosion in my chest. My heart clenched. My lungs froze. My arms gave out beneath me, and before I could even comprehend what was happening, I collapsed. The world tilted. The temple walls spun around me. The sounds of prayer faded into a distant hum. My breath caught in my throat, then stopped. A terrifying coldness crept through my body, spreading from my fingertips to my arms, my chest, my legs. I was dying. I had seen death before. I had watched others leave this world, had guided them through their final moments with whispered prayers, but never had I imagined it would feel like this. So sudden, so inescapable, so final. I tried to speak, to call for help, to move, but it was too late. In an instant, I was outside my body. I hovered above myself, looking down at the lifeless form that had once been me. My body lay still at the altar, my arms spread out in surrender, my lips that had spent a lifetime reciting prayers, motionless. Panic flooded me. I was dead. And yet, I was still aware, still thinking, still existing. I tried to reach out, to touch something, anything, but my hands, if I even had them anymore, passed through the air like mist. I turned toward the temple door, expecting to see the world as I had always known it. But something was wrong. The walls of the temple began to dissolve into shadow. The air grew thick, heavy. A presence, something unseen, wrapped around me like a force I could not fight. I was being pulled away. The temple disappeared. My body was gone. Everything I had ever known was slipping from my grasp. I drifted weightless into the unknown. There was no sky above me, no ground below, only emptiness stretching in every direction. My senses were overwhelmed. I was conscious, aware, yet I had no form. It was as if I existed as thought alone, suspended in nothingness. And then I heard them. Whispers. At first, they were soft, like a breeze rustling through the trees. Then they grew louder, circling around me, a chorus of voices speaking in a language I did not recognize. Some of the words sounded ancient, others were distorted, as if spoken through a veil of shadow. I strained to listen, to understand, but the whispers encircled me, closing in. And then, I saw them, figures emerging from the darkness. At first, they were nothing more than shifting shapes. Then, they moved closer, and I saw their eyes. Hollow, empty, piercing through me. I tried to speak, to demand answers, to cry out for help, but my voice, if I still had one, was gone. A force unlike anything I had ever known pressed against me, suffocating, crushing, overwhelming. The whispers turned to accusations. You will never be free. You failed in your path. Your karma was not enough. You do not belong to the light. Each word was like a blade against my soul. I felt exposed, as if everything I had ever done, every hidden thought, every doubt, they saw it all. I tried to resist, to recite prayers, to summon the mantras I had known since childhood. But the words, The sacred chants that had once given me power were gone. My lips moved, but no sound came. And then, the darkness moved. It pulsed, not like a cloud, not like mist, but like a living, breathing thing. And with it came a force I could not fight. A pull. At first it was subtle, a tug at the edges of my being. Then, it grew stronger, violent, inescapable. I was being dragged downward. The abyss opened beneath me. I saw them, countless lost souls. They were writhing, screaming, reaching out. Faces twisted in horror, eyes wide with the realization that they had been deceived. Some wore the robes of holy men. Others looked like ordinary people, but they all bore the same terror. They cried out, pleading for mercy, for another chance, but there was no escape. I fought with everything in me. I could not go there. But the pull was stronger than I was. I was being dragged toward a fate I could not comprehend, and then at the last possible moment, it happened. A blazing light appeared. It cut through the darkness like fire. The whispers turned to screams. The shadows shrieked in agony. The force that had been dragging me down released its grip. And then, a voice unlike any I'd ever heard. It called my name. And right here, my friends, I want to ask you something. If you have ever felt the call of the light, if inside you feel that there is something greater, something true, write Amen in the comments. It is a sign of faith, a blessing that unites us. And do not forget to tell us from which city you are watching us, so we can include you in our prayers. Because at that moment, when everything seemed lost, the impossible happened. The darkness recoiled. I could feel it. The shadows retreating, screaming, writhing away from the light that had appeared before me. The suffocating weight that had been pressing against my soul, the unseen hands dragging me into the abyss, they lost their grip. For the first time since my death, I could breathe. Not in the way the body breathes, not through lungs, not through the rise and fall of the chest, but in the way the soul inhales peace itself. It poured over me like warm water, filling every crevice of my being. I had never known such a sensation. And then, I saw it. A brilliance unlike anything I had ever witnessed. It was not merely light, it was alive. It was not fire, though it burned. It was not the sun, though it illuminated all things. It was power. It was love. It was something beyond human comprehension. And within it, a figure emerged. At first, I could barely look. The radiance was so overwhelming, so absolute, that my soul trembled in its presence. But as my vision adjusted, I began to perceive him, a man, but not a man, a being of immeasurable authority, yet carrying no burden of arrogance, a force of unshakable power, yet surrounded by the gentleness of an eternal embrace. Every part of me knew who he was before my mind could even comprehend it. Jesus. I had never spoken his name in worship. I had never studied his words. I had never bowed before him. Yet the moment I saw him, I knew he was the one. And in that realization, a trembling overtook me, because I had never sought him. I had spent a lifetime pursuing truth, dedicating my every breath to the divine, sacrificing comfort, pleasures, and even my own body for enlightenment. I had mastered the sacred scriptures, devoted myself to rigorous discipline, and purified my soul through relentless suffering. But now, none of it mattered, because I had never known him. He looked at me, and in that gaze my entire existence was laid bare. He did not speak, but he did not need to. His eyes carried all knowledge, all truth, all understanding. They saw everything, every ritual I had performed, every sacrifice I had made, every word I had ever spoken in prayer. And yet, beneath all of it, I was empty. Terror gripped me. I was not worthy to stand before him. I wanted to fall to my knees, to cover my face, to disappear. I was a man of devotion, a teacher, a seeker of wisdom, and yet here, in the presence of absolute truth, I felt like nothing. I had spent my life believing in karma, in reincarnation, in the idea that my works would elevate my soul, that my effort would be enough. But standing before Jesus, I understood the lie. It was never about my works. It was never about my suffering. It was never about my prayers, my fasting, my discipline. It was about knowing Him, and I had never known Him. A horrifying awareness crept over me. If I had truly died, would I have been lost forever? I trembled. I wanted to speak, to plead, to explain that I had only followed what I had been taught, that I had devoted myself with sincerity, that I had sought truth with all my heart. Would that be enough? Would sincerity save me? And then, He spoke. His voice was not sound. It was existence itself. It was the very foundation of creation speaking into my soul. It carried authority that could not be questioned, truth that could not be debated. Yet there was no wrath in it, no anger, only grief, a sorrow deeper than any I had ever known. Your time is not yet over. The words settled over me like a weight I could not carry. I barely understood them. What did He mean? But you must see the truth. The light around us shifted. The vast radiance of His presence did not dim, but suddenly I was aware that I was no longer in darkness. I was somewhere else. I turned, and before me, stretching into eternity, was a multitude of souls. I gasped. There were millions, possibly more. They stood in vast clusters, stretching as far as the eye could see. They were of every background, some in priestly robes, some in the garments of monks, some in simple everyday clothing. I saw Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, people from all nations, all walks of life. And yet, their faces. Some radiated a peace so profound, I could feel it even from where I stood. Others, however, looked lost, confused, terrified. I could hear the murmurs of disbelief, the whispers of souls realizing something was wrong. Some looked around, expecting answers. Others stood frozen, their eyes locked on something beyond my sight. And then I saw the gate. A massive passageway, glowing with an ethereal light, stood at the farthest edge of this place. And before it, a group of men stood waiting. My breath caught in my throat. They were not ordinary men. They were Hindu priests, gurus, spiritual leaders, and I knew them. They were men I had studied under, men I had revered, men who had devoted their entire lives to the pursuit of divine knowledge. They had guided thousands, led prayers, performed sacred rites. They were the most disciplined, the most enlightened, and yet they were outside. I watched as one of the priests, an elderly man with a long white beard, took a trembling step forward. His hands shook as he lifted them toward the gate, his voice a desperate plea. We followed the path. We lived in discipline. We honored the gods. We spent our lives in devotion. His words hung in the air, but nothing changed. The gate did not open. Another guru, his once dignified face now filled with uncertainty, lifted his hands toward the light beyond the gate. His lips trembled as he called out. We upheld Dharma. We purified ourselves. We chanted, fasted, and gave offerings. Why are we standing outside? His voice was shaking, and then I saw it, the fear in their eyes. These were men of great wisdom. They had followed every law, had spent their entire lives in unwavering devotion. And yet, here they were, pleading, uncertain, unaccepted. A younger monk collapsed to his knees, his hands gripping his chest. His voice was barely a whisper. This must be an illusion, a test. We followed the truth. We lived righteously. Surely we are not being cast out, but no one answered him. I turned back toward Jesus, and when I met his gaze, I already knew the answer. And if you have come this far, if this message is reaching your heart, I ask something simple of you. Comment Amen below. Not for me, but as a sign that you are open to truth. and let us know from which city you are watching, so that we may hold you in our prayers. Because what I was about to witness would change everything. I turned back toward the gate, my breath shallow, my soul trembling under the weight of what I was witnessing. The priests, the monks, the spiritual leaders, men who had devoted their lives to enlightenment, purity, and sacred knowledge, stood outside, waiting, pleading, and the gate remained closed. Beyond it, I saw a place unlike anything I had ever imagined. It was not merely beautiful, it was alive. The light that radiated from beyond the passage was not just illumination, it was a presence, a life force so overwhelming that my soul could barely comprehend it. And within that light, I saw them. People. They had entered. They stood beyond the threshold, bathed in a radiance that welcomed them. Their faces were not confused, not afraid. They carried no desperation, no uncertainty. They belonged there. I watched as more souls approached the gate. Some walked forward with peaceful certainty, stepping through as if drawn by an invisible force. Others hesitated, standing at the threshold, their faces filled with wonder, reverence, awe, and yet they too entered. But the priests, the monks, the ones who had spent their entire lives in spiritual devotion, they did not. I watched as one of the gurus, an elderly man whose wisdom had been sought by thousands, fell to his knees, his hands clasped together in desperation. "Please," he whispered, "I have lived my life in righteousness. I have guided others. I have upheld the sacred texts. I have purified myself through sacrifice and devotion. Let me in." His voice broke at the last words, cracking under the weight of a fear he had never known before. Still, the gate did not open. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Another priest stepped forward. His eyes, once filled with unshakable confidence, now flickered with doubt. "We have done everything required of us," he insisted. "We have followed the teachings. We have fasted. We have prayed. We have renounced the world. We have suffered for the sake of the divine. Is this not enough?" Silence. Then a voice spoke. A voice so powerful that it reverberated through the very fabric of existence. It came from the light. "I never knew you." The words struck the air like a hammer, final and absolute. The priests staggered back, their eyes wide with shock. The elder guru shook his head, disbelief contorting his face. "No," he murmured. "No. I lived in devotion. I honored the sacred ways. His voice broke into a whisper. "I did everything right." The weight of those words settled over me like a crushing storm. I had spent my life believing in karma, in spiritual discipline, in the idea that our efforts determine our fate. I had followed the laws, upheld every ritual, done everything I was supposed to do. And yet here, in this moment, none of it mattered. The people who entered the gate, they were not the most disciplined. They were not the ones who had studied the scriptures the longest, or meditated the deepest, or sacrificed the most. Some of them, many of them, had been sinners in their earthly lives. Some had been broken, lost, rejected by society. They had not achieved perfection through spiritual practice, but they had known Jesus, and that was the only thing that mattered. A horrifying realization crashed over me. I turned to Jesus, my chest tightening with desperation. "Why?" My voice trembled. "Why are they not entering? They were devoted. They lived righteously. They followed the path. Why are they outside?" Jesus did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with sorrow in his eyes. Then, he asked me a question. "Do you understand why they cannot enter?" My breath caught in my throat. I did understand. I just did not want to face the truth. For a lifetime, I had believed that salvation, if such a thing even existed, was earned. That one must work for it, strive for it, sacrifice for it. That righteousness was something we built brick by brick through discipline, purity, suffering. But now, I saw the truth. It was never about works. It was never about suffering. It was never about what we could achieve. It was about knowing him. Jesus turned back to the gate. His expression was not of anger nor condemnation, but of deep, unbearable grief. They place their faith in their own works, he said softly, but they never place their faith in me. The moment he spoke, a weight settled over me, a realization so devastating that I felt my very being tremble. These men, these holy men, these teachers, these leaders, they had missed it. They had spent their entire lives seeking salvation. They had sacrificed everything. They had fasted until their bodies withered, memorized scriptures until their minds overflowed, renounced the world and lived in discipline. And yet, they had never known Jesus, and that was the only thing that mattered. I felt my knees go weak. I had been just like them. And if I had truly died that day in the temple, I would have been standing outside the gate too. I could barely stand. The weight of the truth crushed me, heavier than anything I had ever carried. It was not the kind of weight that bore down on the body, but on the soul. I had spent my life believing I was walking the right path. I had been so sure that my devotion, my discipline, my sacrifice had earned me salvation. But I had been blind. The greatest deception was not rejecting the divine. It was believing that religion could replace a relationship with the one who saves. I looked at Jesus, my heart pounding, my thoughts racing. I wanted to beg for another chance. I wanted to weep for all the wasted years. I wanted to fall at his feet and ask, "What must I do?" But he already knew my heart. "You have seen the truth," he said, "but your time is not over." A deep, trembling breath shuddered through me. "Why?" I whispered. "Why was I shown this?" His gaze did not waver. His presence was unchanging, eternal, absolute. "Because you must warn them." The words struck me like lightning. I saw them in my mind. The millions of people who lived as I once had. People who devoted their lives to tradition, to discipline, to rituals, to suffering, believing it would be enough. People who thought they were saved, but were not. Millions believe they are walking toward salvation, Jesus continued, but they are walking toward destruction. I felt sick. I had been one of them. I had spent my life teaching others how to reach enlightenment, how to escape the cycle of birth and rebirth, how to find peace through discipline. But I had never found God. I had never known Jesus. And if I had died that day, I would have been lost. Jesus turned to me, and his next words shook me to my core. Satan's greatest victory is not turning people against God. It is making them believe they are saved when they are not. I closed my eyes. I had seen the deception. I had seen the priests, the monks, the scholars, standing outside the gate, crying out in desperation. They had trusted in their own works. They had trusted in their prayers, their fasting, their suffering. But they had never trusted in Jesus. And now it was too late for them, but not for me. I opened my mouth to speak, to say that I understood, that I would go, that I would tell them. But before I could form the words, the light around me faded. The overwhelming radiance of Jesus' presence vanished. Everything went dark. And then I gasped. Air rushed into my lungs, as if I had been drowning and had finally broken the surface. My chest heaved, my body jerked, and a blinding white light flooded my vision. I was alive. I lay in a hospital bed, my hands gripping the sheets, my skin drenched in sweat. I blinked rapidly, my heart pounding like a drum, my breath ragged. The world around me was suddenly so small. The hospital walls, the beeping monitors, the sterile smell of disinfectant, these things had once seemed so real. But now I had seen eternity. I had stood at the gates. I had heard the truth from the mouth of the one who saves. And I had been given a second chance. Tears burned my eyes. I had to warn them. I had to tell them. Not everyone would believe me. Some would mock me. Some would reject me. Some would cling to their own works, refusing to see the truth. But that did not matter, because if I stayed silent, if I did nothing, I would be no different from those who had been deceived. The truth was clear. Salvation is not through law. Salvation is not through sacrifice. Salvation is not through rituals, self-denial, or spiritual knowledge. Salvation is through Jesus alone. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. I had been given one last chance, and I would not waste it, because now I knew. And to those of you watching, if this message has touched you, if something inside you is stirring, then I invite you, continue this journey. There is more to be revealed, more to be understood, more to be experienced in the presence of God. All you have to do is click on the next video that is appearing on your screen right now. It is a message that will be revelatory and glorious in your life. Thank you for walking this path with me. Amen.